Glenn, how are you?
Very good. Good to see you
again. Can we celebrate yet?
I would say, well, regarding Iran, no. I think that might be a bit too premature. I don't think this war is over. Indeed, officially it's not over. It's a ceasefire, and it's going to be a big challenge to make the ceasefire stick. And even if it does stick, at some point it has to transition into an actual peace agreement. So, no, I think it's maybe too early to pop the champagne. But
why? What's worrying you the most?
Well, a lot of things can go wrong. I think, for one, I think the US was in a desperate need to end the war. And I think you saw this, the fact that the US, well, more or less capitulated and accepted these negotiations based on Iran's 10-point plan. At the same time, this is a defeat which Trump can't really absorb. So while they have to accept more or less the Iranian terms, he nonetheless have to distance himself from it. So on one hand, accept the terms of the ceasefire. On the other hand, he's forced to go on Twitter or Truth Social and pretend to be angry that the Iranians are, claiming toll in the Strait of Hormuz. They have to pretend as if Lebanon isn't a part of the ceasefire agreement. So I think
reports, you saw the reports on Lebanon, though. They seem to have conceded, and apparently Lebanon's ceasefire is expected this weekend. That came out in the last few minutes. Did you see that?
No, but that's at least that's a step in the right direction. But a key problem, I mean, one of the reasons why Lebanon became such a big issue is because on the first day of the ceasefire, Israel decided to launch its largest attack on Lebanon, and then not just this surgical attack as BBC would have us believe, but doing some very horrific bombing of residential areas. So you can only interpret this, I think, in one way, which is efforts to sabotage the ceasefire. So I think it's a lot of problem. It's a very difficult defeat for the US to accept. It's also something the Israelis would likely sabotage, and further all, the diplomacy is also tainted with the distrust, given how dishonest it's been in the past. So overall, I'm a bit pessimistic. What I'm hoping the most for is simply that the ceasefire extends, and then at least the killing ends. So then they essentially decide to extend the ceasefire. But I don't see an actual peace agreement, because I think Trump has too many sticking points. Yeah, they officially have to object, but I think Trump has to accept certain things, but he can't officially accept them. So, and I think the Iranians, if it's like a de facto agreement, but they don't want to go back to the fighting either. So I think this is the best we can hope for: extended ceasefires. I hope I'm wrong, and we'll get a nice peace agreement, and neighbors learn to live in peace again. But I'm skeptical.
Yeah, there's a report that the US released $7 billion in frozen Iranian funds, unconfirmed. But for me, that was an incredible indicator that this is for real. $7 billion. That's unconfirmed. My team is trying to verify it right now, but they just came out. As we were speaking, I was speaking to General McKenzie, former CENTCOM commander, just a few minutes ago before this, and he kept saying something in the interview. I kept saying, like, this looks like a strategic defeat. And obviously, he's the expert, not I, and not me. But I kept saying that it just seems like a strategic defeat to the US. It's hard to paint it otherwise. He keeps saying, look, it might look like it, and it will be if Iran controls the Strait of Hormuz. But he's saying that there's no way even an option on the table. And obviously, he's someone that knows the policy in the region, but also knows Trump pretty well. He worked under Trump and then Biden, and he kept saying something. He's like, it's not over. And he gave the example of World War II in 1942. Now, I think he said like 3 times, and I think he meant that the negotiations are not over, but it wasn't specific to the negotiations. So it makes me worry that maybe, again, I'm being too optimistic that this ceasefire is a lot more fragile than I think. The reason I think the ceasefire will hold, Glenn, is I just feel there's no appetite either side to continue the war. I know there's some voices in the IRGC that may want to avenge the death of Khamenei. I know maybe some of the proxies, maybe some people in Hezbollah may want to continue the war and support the Palestinians. But I think the majority, Iran is licking its wounds. Hezbollah's barely surviving in a way, and they depend on Iran, so they have to listen to Iran. And Iran won't Iran, they haven't even retaliated to Israeli attacks on Hezbollah yet, even though they may still do it. Even if there's a ceasefire, they may still retaliate as kind of a warning and a way to show strength. We're kind of seeing a new emboldened Iran, which we'll talk about in a while. But I just feel like no country has an appetite for the war, and obviously the US lost a lot. It's just been a total loss for the US on so many fronts. From a strategic perspective. So that's why I think the ceasefire will hold, because I think there's no sides that really have an appetite for the war.
Well, the optimist in me would agree with you to a large extent in terms of all sides not wanting any more of this. I mean, I think there would be a strategic interest on the Iranian side to drag it out a little bit more, because the longer this goes on, the more the US will be weakened, and the less likely they will come back in the future to attack Iran again. On the other hand, Iran, is a rational country. They also realize you don't want to inflict too great of a humiliating defeat on the United States, something that they can't accept. Because at the end of the day, the Israelis and the United States are both nuclear powers. So again, you don't want to overreach. And for the Israelis as well, this is a very difficult spot they're in. I mean, for decades, of course, they had the US behind them. They never had to make any compromises. Again, the whole clean break idea since the 90s was we don't need to make settlements. We'll just plow through and impose our will by force. And you could do this because you would have the hegemon behind you. So this is something that they could do. But now, of course, what are they going to do? They're overstretched. They can't defeat Hamas properly. They're overstretched in Lebanon. And now they thought, are we going to pull back a bit, abandon the past 3 decades of this aggressive policy of maximum military supremacy? No, I think they weren't willing to walk this back, so they went for the going after essentially who they consider to be the head of the snake, which is Iran. And now it failed. Are they gonna lick their wounds, accept defeat, withdraw, change the entire security strategy had over the past 30 years, which means just dominate everyone with military force, accept Iran as a legitimate major power? Because Iran's going to exit this war after it rebuilds and recovers, and as you said, licks its wounds, is going to be in a much stronger position in many ways, given that it holds the Strait of Hormuz. I mean, the Gulf states, they can never do anything like this again, because they would, they would block their access. They can challenge the petrodollar. They can, they can make a lot of money alone on the Strait of Hormuz. So I think the Israelis have a lot to lose if they're even with a peace. The Americans as well, they will see their influence in the Middle East decline. Iran, which was supposed to be top priority to regime change, and I would argue destroy, will now become a key power on the Eurasian continent. So there's a lot of people who don't want to see any of this happen. So and the problem is everything's been framed as everything or nothing, and the strategic framework, that's a very dangerous position to be in. But again, reality has to kick in at some point, and I don't think they can defeat Iran. It's justice. It's not in the cards. So I think it's pragmatism versus the ideal scenario, which can't be achieved.
Yeah, I agree. I think the Middle East never looking at it will. I've made that statement. I said from the get-go, I said Israel has to, for the first time, there could be a turning point for Israel. Israel's impunity in doing whatever it wants in the region, especially when it comes to Lebanon, Palestine to a different extent, and Syria, is not going to be the same, because they've become extremely unpopular. Globally, they've become politically toxic in all countries, really. And when it comes to the region, Gulf countries, while they're pissed off at Iran, they're fuming about Israel, a lot of them feeling that Israel dragged them to this war. Israel's to blame for this war. You saw the letter from Al-Habtour, the billionaire in the UAE. So they're really upset at Israel. But at the same time, they can't not treat Iran as a superpower. And Iran now has more leverage over these countries than Israel. Israel's always had a lot of leverage over the Gulf through the US. The big card that Israel's had, and I've said this a lot, the big card that Israel's had is that, hey, we have Big Brother here. They could come and crush you if you guys don't sign the Abraham Accords or allow us to do this or support us against Iran. The US got bases in your country. You depend on the American dollar. that card, while it's still there, it's there to a lesser extent. And Iran has a nuclear weapon, and that nuclear weapon is called the Strait of Hormuz. So whenever whenever someone goes too far and crosses Iran's like, we're going to block you from the Strait of Hormuz, and let's see if anyone around the world does something about it. Because the last time the world's biggest military did something about it, they failed. They couldn't open it. So what are you going to do to the Saudis? What are you going to do to the other Qataris or the not Qataris, the Bahrainis or the Kuwaitis or the Gulf, the Emiratis? So that's why I think the balance of power will shift, and that would have reverberations. We're already seeing it, like Lebanon, delegations from Israel and Lebanon meeting, and I've been calling for it for a while. And I made a post a few days ago, 3 days ago. I'm like, Netanyahu, you should meet the president of Lebanon now, immediately. A few hours later, they decided to meet. Now, I would love to say that was because of my tweet, but that was unrelated to my tweet. That's because they have no choice. That's because Trump is like, I can't do this again. Screw you, Israel, whatever intelligence services offered him the intel that tricked him. Obviously, screw you, whatever people in his administration that gave him the information to trick him into thinking this is going to be a 4-day regime change. And I think his patience for the Israelis is going to be has been depleted after this war. And so I think the Israelis will have to make peace with the Lebanon and Hezbollah. And I think Hezbollah either has to fold into the Lebanese military, or they have to change their approach to Israel as well. So they can't expect Israel not to go back into striking them if they go back and call death to Israel or decide to interfere in the Palestinian cause on behalf of Iran. So there also needs to a big shift in Iran's proxy network. I don't know if that will be the case. I don't know if Mujtaba will keep the proxy network alive.
No, it's hard to say. And what is an interesting point, the Iranians would have to, give something as well in order to find some kind of a wider peace in the region. I just don't. I think it's just became overly complicated that it simply can't be done, even though this is in the interest of most of the states. Even you mentioned the split now in the relationship between the U.S. and Israel. Only a few years ago, this would have been almost unthinkable to see the kind of opposition to Israel which you see now in the United States, with people like Joe Kent resigning from such a top position to have all this, all this other, leading journalists and all taking a hard stance against Israel. So, and now as well with this New York Times piece coming out about how Israel essentially duped Trump into this disastrous war, I think a lot of opposition is building. I have never seen anything like this, at least. So, at some point, you can say ideologies, you can say people are bought off, you have institutionalized this kind of interest, but at some point power and reality has to set in. And I think this is what you'll see in the Middle East as well. That is, all these countries can be as angry as they want at Iran, but if their main backer in this alliance system, the United States, starts to pull back, at some point, either if you want to survive, you make peace with it. I mean, we have a similar situation in Europe. We decided to, after the Cold War, expand NATO, essentially make an enemy out of Russia, because this is what was required to cement American presence in Europe. And but now, of course, the Americans are pulling back. They're leaving. If we want to survive, if we want to prosper, you have to make peace with the largest country on the continent. So even though the Europeans are, couldn't be more angry and hostile towards Russia, at some point, if they want to survive, maybe they won't, because we have a lot of crazies. But if they want to survive, they have to adjust to the new distribution of power. And in that distribution of power, the Americans, they're going. And it's the same in the Gulf states. And I'm very sure they're having, I know they're having the same discussions in East Asia. I mean, if you're in South Korea or Japan, Taiwan, how much do you want to bet on being a frontline state for the Americans against, for example, China? It's quite foolish. You have to make peace with the neighbors.
I'm going to find a report quickly now. The report literally came out before our interview, something along those lines, where a lot of these South Asian countries are reconsidering their relationship with the US and moving closer to China. So that is happening as we speak. Okay, let's look at the other pessimistic option, because we're talking like this is over. How could this break out again? What can happen there? What can go wrong?
Yeah, no, like I said, the optimist in me would like to agree, but I tend to be a bit more pessimistic. I think it's going to be a too difficult defeat to accept. They have I don't think that, in a rational world, I think, you just have to accept this defeat and move on. But I don't think that is possible. I think the political costs are too high. So, no, I think there's going to be probably, well, I would suspect that Trump starts to, talk himself. Well, what's a good way of framing it? Well, in order for Trump to survive politically, after he essentially conceded the defeat to the Iranians, I think he's going to have to try to talk himself out of it. That is, to begin to contest Iran's control over Hormuz. He's going to have to contest a lot of things, and at some point, the pressure is going to be too high. But also with Iran, they might. In any war, you have a lot of problems. The losing side gets too desperate. Again, you can see this in Europe, while the winning side can be struck with hubris. I think this is with Iran as well. If there's some attacks against Palestinians, the Iranians can, we're going to shut down the Strait of Hormuz. I mean, this could go to their heads as well. So if they overplay their hand, you may have a problem. And I think I told you this before. This is my concern about Europe as well. Now that the Europeans, we're losing in our war against Russia, we're getting more and more desperate and do stupid things, while the Russians, they feel the victory. They might start shoot down our drones and all over the Black Sea soon, and get to be too cocky, and then you have all the ingredients for a big clash. So I think you can see a similar scenario playing out.
That's a really good point. That's a really good point. Really good angle. We're talking like Iran had a resounding win.
Yeah,
I don't think that's the case either. Iran they won strategically, but I don't think they had a resounding win. Their military capabilities have been pummeled. Like I was speaking to General McKenzie, and obviously he thinks that the US did not even strategically lose in his view, and it's too early to say that. But he said, Mario, like at CENTCOM when we did, obviously he couldn't share any classified info, any classified intel, but he said, Mario, at CENTCOM when we did those simulations of what an Iranian attack would look like, we would have expected significantly more destruction, a lot more missiles fired at once. Wouldn't have expected a missile here, a missile there, a few drones there, a few drones there. He was surprised by their capability to keep firing that amount of drones. That was a surprise. But in terms of missiles, he thinks the reason they weren't firing many missiles is because of the US and Israeli capabilities of locating the launchers quickly and striking them. Now, I know there's different leaks that 50% of the missiles are still there, 20%, 30% are still there. Different sources say different things. And it's hard to trust which wasn't true and which ones are intentionally leaked for whatever reason. But going to his point, maybe Iran's capabilities have been degraded significantly. Remember, that's the same Iran that was barely surviving in January dealing with the revolution. That's the same government that wasn't that popular before the war, may not be that popular after the war, because a lot of people might blame the regime, the IRGC's foreign policy, to getting the country into this war, to getting the country into this economic mess and getting the country to sanctions. And they might look at like the Gulf and say, why don't we do the same thing as the Gulf, which are flourishing? So there is a lot of people in Iran that are upset with there's even reports and videos coming out that people are still resisting militarily, going at a checkpoint, a besieged checkpoint, and shooting the people there. So maybe Iran is a lot weaker than we give them credit for. They haven't retaliated for the attacks on Lebanon. They should have retaliated on the same day. They said Pakistan convinced them for restraint, but Israel is still striking Hezbollah, and Iran is still, talking the talk, but they haven't walked the walk. They closed the Strait of Hormuz. They've stood their ground on the sanctions, on the negotiations. Sorry, they're like, we're not going to start the negotiations until the strikes on Hezbollah stop. So they are standing their ground, but not to a massive extent. So I don't think there's not much hubris. Maybe there will be soon when they rebuild their military, but they might be a lot weaker than people think.
Well, one shouldn't exaggerate their rise to great power status just yet. I mean, they do. You mentioned before they have a nuclear weapon now, the Strait of Hormuz. I noticed that the former president of Russia, Dmitry Medvedev, he more or less said the same thing. And
I got it from him. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Okay. Well, it's a good point. It is quite a powerful instrument. So, but that doesn't mean that they've exited this without a scratch. I mean, they've taken a lot of destruction to their energy facilities, towards their infrastructure, towards their industries, and of course the population, the military, a lot of it has been harmed. It's going to take not just years, it could take decades to fix some of these things, irrespective of them, pulling in 100 billion a year in toll from the Strait of Hormuz. So no, I wouldn't exaggerate the extent, they will be successful. You can, well, I wouldn't compare it. Well, it can be comparable, for example, to the situation of the Soviet Union after the Second World War. It was in a geopolitical, a very powerful position, but of course the whole country was burned to the ground. So you don't want to exaggerate, but this is just a hubris part. There's other things that can go wrong too. This war was not only between the U.S. and Iran. You mentioned Israel, which may have an interest to sabotage, but what about Iraq? They more or less liberated themselves from Western troops. Why shouldn't Iraq also seize Kuwait? They can, and there's many who'd like to, and I don't think the Iranians would necessarily oppose. And there's just a lot of small things. Once they attacked Iran, they opened up a big can of worms. Which again, I'm not saying that the Iraqis will take Kuwait. I'm just saying that's like one out of many possibilities.
When you go from 0 to 100, then everything below 100 becomes fair game.
Yeah. No. So it's just so many things which are up in the air now, and what will happen to the whole anti-Iranian alliance if the Gulf states decide that we have to make peace? Even the Israelis might decide we have to make peace. If you remember back when the Chinese were pushing for this improved relations between the Saudis and the Iranians, well, at that point, I remember the former head of Mossad went out in the media and said, listen, if they're going to make peace with Iran, are we going to be the only one standing alone in an anti-Iranian alliance? We don't really have that much, disputes with them. I think the Israelis know that they exaggerated the nuclear threat and all of this. I think it was a way of making Israel's opposition to Iran, essentially making it America's problem, because Iran is in no way a threat to the US. Only if they had nuclear weapons and they were ruled by people who are crazy, irrational, and want to burn the world, then it's America's problem. So I think a lot of the narratives, a lot of the conflicts could die down. But again, this is an optimistic expectation. I'm expecting more with this massive shift in the balance of power to have more negative impacts on security.
I have another point. I'll repeat one of the points you've made that is more on the optimistic side, is that China has a lot more influence in the region now. And a lot of people are moving more to China as being the stable superpower in the world, which is heartbreaking to see because I want the US to be there or Europe or any democracy. But anyway, China's proving itself to be the stable country that's following international law. So if China has more influence in the region, can't they do what they did between Iran and Saudi, do it again between Iran and the Gulf? And if that does happen, again, I'm repeating a point you've made, but it's an important point. If that does happen, then first Israel will be like, what about us? Now it's like us against the world. So we have to join and start find a way to improve relations with Iran rather than degrade them and mold the law every few years. And that could lead to a time of prosperity. I know we've opened up a can of worms that could lead to more stability, and it's very possible. But also, if you have that, most issues in the Middle East after Iraq, Afghanistan war with the US, everything afterwards, in Lebanon, in Syria, even the clashes in Iraq, etc., was all because of the power struggle in Yemen, obviously between Israel, Saudi, and Iran. Lebanon is the best example. You had the Sunni group in Saudi, the Hariri, the Future movement that was supported by Saudi, and then Hezbollah assassinated some of them, and they were supported by Iran. Then they got the Americans supporting the ones that were supported by Saudis. Israel is like backing, I don't know who in the background. They used to have a group in the militia in the south of Lebanon as well. So you got all these different countries having their hands in that pot. Now, if all these countries stop their power struggle, then the proxy wars also stop. So maybe we do see what Trump talked about. Trump did a post today about the Great Reset or something along the lines. There is a scenario, as someone who, just like you, Glenn, has been very critical of the war, there is a scenario that we may actually see a great reset in this. If Trump plays the right cards now, he can turn a spectacular failure into possibly a spectacular success by changing the face of the Middle East and literally taking a U-turn. Instead of going with Israel to destroy Iran, telling Israel, smacking them in the face, telling them, guys, stop striking Hezbollah, which is happening, by the way. He gave him a deadline, reportedly, and telling Israel, normalize relations with Iran. And then maybe even the US works with China to normalize relations. Now, that's a bit too far-fetched, too optimistic, because there's always that struggle between China and the US. But it could be a race between those two countries. The one that makes peace now is the one that will have more influence in the region. So we may see China and the US both try to be the ones that make peace in those countries. And Trump wants a peace, the other piece, P-I-E-C-E, a piece of the Strait of Hormuz as well. So we might end up having from the great failed war to the great business, the greatest business deal of our generation, that is Iran and the US building a toll booth in the Strait of Hormuz. And so you never know, but there's a lot of unknowns that could either be incredibly bad for the region or possibly incredibly good. And again, China's a big decision maker as well now.
Well, it's interesting with Trump because first he apparently accepted that the Iranians would set up a toll booth. Then he tried to oppose it, like this is unacceptable. Then he tried to pivot. Okay, we can't really stop them. How about we do it together? The US can also get the influence and the money. And I actually did an interview on the Indian TV this morning, and I was very dismissive of the idea. I said the Iranians might do this with Oman. Due to geographical reasons, they got reasonable relations, and also it would create more of a framework of a collective security arrangement, and mitigate concerns about Iranian dominance. All of this. So, but it is possible. I mean, the reason why I don't think the Iranians would accept it is because they want to expel the US from the region, to remove its influence. But the reason they want to do this is they don't want to be under US attacks again. But if it was a way of incorporating the US in a way that would reassure the Iranians that they wouldn't be struck again by the US, nothing is impossible. It's a bit like after the Cold War, or the Soviets and then the Russians thereafter. They both envisioned the US being on the continent, so they don't necessarily have to expel the Americans. I think sharing the toll is maybe a bit too much, but if one wants to be optimistic, you can see that Trump can flip this horrific, humiliating defeat into an advantage. That is, if he's been expelled from the Middle East, well, he wanted to leave the Middle East, didn't he? He said this was the national security strategy of December last year. That is, in a multipolar world, the US can't be everywhere. He has to prioritize. He wants to be in the Western Hemisphere and East Asia. That means he has to pivot out of Europe and out of the Middle East. Well, now they're leaving the Middle East, maybe not voluntarily. And at the same time, Trump has to, shift the blame on someone for this defeat. And he's looking primarily towards the Europeans. They didn't even help him. It's NATO's fault. So, he can get out of both Europe and the Middle East in accordance with what is essentially the United States national security strategy. And at the same time, decouple a bit from the Israelis. If he wants to go down this path, he could try to win back America firsters. I don't think any of this will happen, but there is a possibility. It is a distant option. And but again, also, if one wants more stability in the Middle East, I think it could happen that we'll get it. I think that what creates peace is a balance of power. That is, in other words, I will not mourn the U.S. hegemony. It doesn't mean I want to. I tend to be often quite empathetic towards Russia, China, Iran, all these countries which try to restore a balance of power. It's not because I want to be ruled by Russia or China or Iran. I just think that what creates the conflicts after the Cold War is the lack of restraint. You need a balance of power for peace. This is essentially what Stephen Waltz wrote after the Cold War. That is, the biggest threat to peace now is the U.S. itself. It's no one to constrain it. It's just going to engage in wars, expand east and west. It's going to be out of control. It's going to make a lot of enemies for itself. It's going to create collective balancing. It's going to exhaust its resources. So look at the U.S. in the 90s and now. I don't think hegemony has been good for the U.S. It hasn't been good for the world. So I think a balance of power is necessary for stability and peace, which is why I want to see Russia accommodated in Europe, Iran accommodated in the Middle East, and East Asian security architecture that accommodates China. I think that's more conducive to having stability and peace, not to replace one hegemon with another one.
That is extremely well said. That is very well said. I think you've articulated your position in such a good way, and such a logical way, and such a fair way. It's like you're because people put you in different buckets. You're not being pro whatever. You're pro a multipolar world. You do want a democracy like me, I'm assuming, because you live in Norway. You want a democracy to be the leader in the world, but also not to have no checks and balances. Kind of have a carte blanche to do whatever it wants. And you mentioned Iran as one. You so talked Russia, China, and you also mentioned Iran. Do you think Iran could become at that level, that big of a power?
Well, in natural resources, they're quite big, but no, they can't become a Russia or a China. But I think they can become one of the large
A Saudi?
Eurasian power. No, I think they can be much more powerful than Saudi Arabia. But in the Eurasian continent, if you have a larger group of countries, you have Russia, China, India, Iran. I mean, I think all of these can be large to great powers. So I think it's an important component of the Eurasian continent.
Wow, I didn't know. Iran is 3 times, I thought, double the size. It's almost 3 times the size of Saudi in terms of population.
Yeah, no,
That's
they have
insane.
90 million. The Saudis
93, yeah.
Yeah. So, but also territory. They're almost 4 times Iraq. They're massive. The territory
Bigger, more
population.
people, bigger population than Turkey.
Yeah. No, it's a huge country. But they've been under crippling sanctions for all these years. So if there's a possibility to normalize relations with them, and I think that's a good idea now, because whatever the White House might say, it's not just that Iran comes out more powerful after this, but they're also going to come out feeling a bit more insecure after having all these attacks. I mean, and also the new leadership, the IDF just came out with they told the Knesset that the new government in Iran is more extreme than the former. And I would say, well, of course, this kind of happens when you bomb a country to bits. So you're going to have Iran coming
kill
out
kill the leader with their family. Kill the leader. Imagine killing Trump and his whole family. Imagine how Americans would feel.
No, exactly. So I don't think more bombing of Iran is what's required. I think if there would be an effort to normalize relations, essentially embrace Iran as another normal power, I think that could reduce some of the security competition. Because if tensions follow now after this war, I think there's a good chance Iran would acquire nuclear weapons. I mean, it would make sense. They need a proper deterrent so this doesn't happen again.
They have it. I really don't think they do it. I agree with Medvedev so much. I've been saying it for a while. I've been saying they don't need nuclear weapons because they have the Strait of Hormuz. Medvedev made it sound better that their nuclear weapon is the Strait of Hormuz, and that's just so well said. I really don't think people understand how much power they've just unlocked. Assuming that the US can open up the Strait of Hormuz. It's just too costly for them. They decided not to because the economic cost is too great. Because going back to your point, that Iranian hubris could be a threat to so there's 2 big threats to the ceasefire: Iranian hubris or Israeli foreign policy or aggressiveness or hawkishness. So Israel could sabotage this, which we'll discuss in a bit, but Iranian hubris is a real danger. There's people within the regime that kept firing missiles and drones allegedly against the Gulf, even after the administration, the government, the Iranian regime said, the ceasefire is up, and the Iranian regime, denied responsibility for those. But they could have been part of their mosaic structure that some of the commanders are upset that the war has ended, and they might have decided independently to fire those missiles and drones. But there is that faction of the IRGC that may want the war to continue. They may want to avenge, for ideological reasons or just out of anger, they may want to avenge the death of Khamenei. And that is a risk. Or they may think Iran is much stronger than it actually is. They think they won. It was a massive win for Iran. And there is no way the US could open the Strait of Hormuz. And if they push the US enough, if they keep, let's say they have an agreement to keep charging a toll for 4 months. Let's say 5 months later, they're still charging a toll and they decide they want to continue charging it for another 6 months because they were just drunk in that money and they love the money there. That could end up in another war in 5-6 months from now.
No, I agree. That's why I think if you compare it to a toll, when your government puts up a toll on the highway, they always have a good reason. Oh, we just have to, do this or this with the money to fix the roads. But, and then we'll take it down in 10 years. They never come down. There's never So no, I think it's the same way with this. Once the toll is set up, I can't imagine them walking away from this. It's who wants to give up free money, but I think the hubris will be the hubris of Iran. It won't be constrained by its adversaries, that is the U.S. and Israel, because the more they push back, the more it's going to reaffirm Iran's security concerns. I think it will come from allies more, that is China, Russia, and friendly countries who will not care for Iran to disrupt international trade in this manner.
Yeah.
I think during the war, when Iran faced an existential threat, the Americans and the Israelis wanted to destroy it. Then, of course, the Chinese and the Russians and all, they know that Iran's fighting for its survival, and it's not even in their interest to see Iran being destroyed. But in peace times, for Iran to begin to use it as an instrument of bullying other countries, I think they would lose a lot of friends and be balanced. This is the whole point of a balance of power. If any country begins to excessively exercise its force, others will then go against it and balance it. So I think there will be a natural mechanism in the international system to resolve this.
What about Israel? How worried are you that they will sabotage everything? Hold on. Trump appears in recent conversations with advisors to have conceded the Strait of Hormuz, a hub of global commerce that remains effectively shut despite its fragile ceasefire, that the Strait of Hormuz is unlikely to completely reopen soon, according to senior White House official that spoke to Reuters. So he's accepted. Oh, wow. Also, following reports that a ceasefire between Lebanon and Israel is imminent, the Iranian delegation is finally en route to Islamabad for negotiations tomorrow. So as two positive developments. 3, breaking, a ceasefire between Lebanon and Israel is expected to be announced tomorrow, sources tell Al Hadath. So lots of good news happening. Number 1, the delegation from Iran is finally heading to Pakistan. Number 2 is a ceasefire is expected to be announced tomorrow. Perfect. And number 3 is Trump conceded the obvious, is that Strait of Hormuz will not open soon. I respect him for that.
Well, it's a bit foolish for him to continue to hammer on, though. Like if he says, Iran better not dare to, put up a toll booth on the Strait of Hormuz. This is unacceptable. I mean, this kind of tough talk is necessary to make it sound as if he did make a massive concession. But if you hammer on too long about this, it's going to make you look weak, because at the end of the day, there's nothing he can do about it. What's he going to do? He can complain all he can complain all he wants, and nothing's going to change. And he can't really enter the war again because, it was difficult enough to get out the first time. So I think, he's going to have to adjust to realities. And the realities is that the Strait of Hormuz will at least partly be controlled by Iran, and they want their reparations. So I do think that reality has to come set in at some point.
I have, since we agreed a lot today, Glenn, I'm going to tell you about a tweet I made today a few hours ago that I've been on a roll with my tweets about, I said I expect ceasefire in Lebanon this weekend, got that right. They got that Trump is off-ramping, got that right. This one is probably going to be my big wrong one that crushes everything else that I got right. And I put a post today, I said, unpopular opinion, the Ukraine war will end this year. Now, don't get too upset. Don't use that as a reason to not come back on the show. But I genuinely believe, because of what happened with Iran, Europe realized how vulnerable they are, and they need that energy from Russia, because the Middle East is still very unstable. Trump needs a big political win. He's just gotten the US in a horrible war. He needs to end something. And I just have a feeling that the kind of rhetoric from Zelensky, from the Russian and Ukrainian side, has kind of calmed a bit, even seemed a bit more positive. I think there was even a statement about Budanov recently, something about that he expects the war to end soon. Please check me on this, but I think I've seen it reported or confirmed. I'm not sure. But I genuinely think that, as I said, the reverberations of the Iran war will be felt well outside the region. And I think one of them will be felt is the Ukraine war. I know one could argue Russia may be more emboldened because they're making so much more money from energy. But at the same time, I think it's what happened in Iran will just start, we're going to see a shift away from reliance on the US. And that may involve concessions on the Ukrainian side from the Europeans. So it's a bit too early, and obviously this is a bit too out there to say, because the war, it just seems like another forever war, and there's no good indicators yet. But what do you think of that? And could there be any link or any impact, positive or negative? Maybe it's complete opposite, you believe, from the Iran war and what we're seeing a potential ceasefire to what we're seeing in Russia-Ukraine.
No, I think it will have a positive effect in terms of bringing the war to an end. But that's because, again, I think that again the root cause of the war has been NATO expansion. It was a toppling of the Ukrainian government attempt to pull them into the NATO orbit. For this reason, the Russians have set some very high demands. They want Ukraine to restore its neutrality, so no NATO expansion. They want essentially secession, or for them to cede territories. Which is almost impossible for the Ukrainians and the NATO countries to accept. And so the demands of the Russians are really high. But for the Russians, this is an existential threat. So yes, they're high demands, but there is no other way. This is what they need to end this existential threat against them. So for this reason, I think that the only way the war can end is either, this is the only way. Either we'll have a nuclear exchange or the Russian will win. I think this is the only way. You can't defeat the world's largest nuclear power, which considers it to be facing an existential threat. So I think that for this reason, if you want to end the war, essentially there has to be pressure mounted on Ukraine to accept what is a very humiliating defeat. And if I was Ukrainian, I would be horrified by what's essentially being offered. But this is, but you're essentially seeing now the Iran war pushing in this direction. That is, Ukraine now, there's less money for the Ukrainians, the Europeans.
Yeah, less munitions, less stockpiles.
Yeah, less money, less weapons. Everything is looking much, much worse for the Ukrainians. Meanwhile, the Russians are now being flooded with cash. The Americans can't afford to sanction them anymore. And so I think this will shift advantage significantly to the Russians now ahead of their summer offensive as well, or spring offensive. Furthermore, but at the end of the day, I don't buy into the rhetoric we get across the West, which is that Russia wants to conquer all of Ukraine. If this was the case, then the war will only get worse. I think the Russians want to put an end to this, but they need to have their security demands met. They've tried for 30 years to talk to NATO, ask for pan-European security architecture, something that would also look after Russian security. They didn't get it, and now they're going in with through military force, and that's why this has been so bloody. But it looks like they're gonna get it, and possibly with J.D. Vance, taking over negotiations with Iran, perhaps they will also send him to Moscow, get Witkoff and Kushner away. Maybe there will be more consistency and reason coming from J.D. Vance. So I think, I'm not sure if it would end this year, but I think there's a very good chance for it. I mean, how much longer can this go on?
Also, NATO's weaker than ever. We're talking about Trump pulling out of NATO, the possibility of Trump pulling out of NATO. Now it's looking more likely than ever. I don't think it will happen, but it does show weakness in NATO. So I think this is an opportunity now in the next 2 years, with where everything is sitting, for the two countries to end it. Because on one side, Trump's volatility may even scare Russia. This is the guy that was talking about wiping out a generation in Iran, and out of nowhere started a war with Iran. So that's actually that unpredictability is a weapon that the US has, but also it scares the hell out of Zelensky. So I think that uncertainty from the two countries, they both wanted to end. I genuinely think that I agree with you with everything you've said. We may see another positive development there, and Trump being able to pull a peace deal. And that might even be linked with Iran in some ways. There might be concessions on the Iranian side further, the lifting of sanctions or whatever it is, and concessions on the Putin-Zelensky war as well, on the Ukraine war. So they might be intertwined, because remember in the Alaska discussions, there was a lot of talks that what Trump was willing to do is include a lot of other discussions, a lot of deals, a lot of other deal making outside of Ukraine in those negotiations. So that's why I said the possibility of overlap is real. So yeah, I'm glad you're optimistic about that one too. It seems we're two optimists talking, Glenn.
Well, the war has been. This has been a war of attrition. I mean, they've been gradually weakened over so long time now, and again, it's not just the manpower of Ukraine; it's the weapons which have been stripped from the NATO countries, and So no, all of this now I think amounts to yes, some kind of, well, has to impact the battlefield in some way, and also the way they're considering diplomacy. And I saw the NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte give this interview today on the media, where he made the point that, well, Ukraine probably won't be able to get a date to join NATO because there's a bit too much opposition. He mentioned the United States, Germany. I mean, a lot of countries don't want Ukraine in there, and also you can't get a Ukrainian because then you can't have peace with Russia. So no, so there has to be something has to give, but also the way the Russians, they might be a bit shook by what Trump has done, but it also but not scared into submission. I think more they've been shocked by how he essentially went in to kill the entire leadership, how diplomacy was a mere fraud. So they don't. I don't think they trust in the stability of working with Trump. I think they saw it as an opportunity first, that they finally had a president they could work with. But no, they want a quick end to this. But also, again, maybe there's optimism in me again. But the Ukrainians as well. I'm not sure if it was Budanov who made this. Well, someone on the Ukrainian military ranks made the point that. The Ukrainians, all the Ukrainians want a victory over Russia, but they're all hiding from recruitment officers. So nobody wants to pay the price. So it could be that we might be looking towards an end to this. And of course, if NATO looks like it's going to fail, you don't want to be Germany or Britain at this point, because they are on top of Russia's list now of who they would hold accountable for, where their vengeance would be aimed. So, no, hopefully, again, I'm betting on reason and common sense, but we're a bit of shortage on it in Europe at the moment.
Agree. Glenn, always a pleasure. Keep doing what you're doing on YouTube. Thank you so much for your show. I watch it often, and thank you for coming on the show as well. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mario.